The Pitt from a writing perspective is fascinating. It's not a show on the surface you'd think is complex, but the more you peel back each layer, the process becomes more elaborate, and I think The Pitt is deceptively one of the best written shows on television currently. This may seem like a big statement, especially for a genre that isn't necessarily known for great quality, but I want to lay out why The Pitt's writing is so masterful and explore the intricate machinations of how the show operates. To clarify before going into the beginning aspect, each season is a single day, composed of 15 episodes with each one spanning an hour of a single shift. The Pitt is also a methodical show with numerous moving parts and with an extreme attention to detail. This makes the aspect of writing impressive because being able to write something so complicated and achieving this at such a high level of authenticity without utterly decimating the continuity is an extreme challenge. To solve this problem, the writers explicitly write with a map. The showrunners first approached a production designer to make the iconic set first, breaking the precedent of building the set after the script is done. Then they'd manage the map chronologically through each episode with characters acting as sticky notes.
All of our writers, we all have maps at home of the set. It's kind of like playing Risk. You have your map, you have all your doctor pieces, you're moving them around and trying to keep track of everything.
Having this map beforehand is crucial because the location is an integral part of the story, and the sheer density of characters buzzing around in this space need to be kept track of. If not, the result would be unshackled chaos. Along with other important things like Dana, the charge nurse, managing all of this, patients needing to be in specific rooms for continuity, and characters are inherently tied to the patients, and even juggle multiple of them. This map allows the writers to visualize the sheer depth of everything happening in the space and are able to meaningfully tell a story within this hurricane. Because a major part of the show is that inherent frenetic energy. You don't want to compromise that noise and depth with a writer forcing a long break of dialogue as an example that realistically shouldn't take place. This leads into an interesting dynamic of writing with a map, where the writers have to specifically account for how long it takes to walk certain sections of the set for how long the dialogue can realistically be.
We needed to know how long it took to get from Trauma 1 to Central 14, and how long it took from Central 14 to North 4, so that we could write dialogue that would take up exactly that period of time.
The only other outside example I can think of that's done this is 1917, the war movie of a messenger carrying a letter through a battlefield, and it's made to seem like it's all done in one shot. In that movie, the length of the trench during construction was dependent on how much dialogue there was in the script. In The Pitt, you can't bend the set to your will. This bases the writing in realism because walking past certain areas may bring up distractions, or walking past a character on the map may introduce a dialogue opportunity or unique reactions. Like, when you think about it, long dialogue stretches in The Pitt are pretty rare and mainly happen at very specific quiet moments, normally after major events so that our characters can digest and process what's happened. Most of the time though, characters are regularly pressured and disruptions are common. This naturally acts as a straining conflict, and Robbie, as an example, is highly in demand. If he needs to go from point A to point B, there's a high chance people will interrupt him and further put more strain on his character. Like, a popular funny throughline in season 1 was Robbie's constant struggle of not having enough time to pee. So overall, it's interesting how the writers use a map to be on the same page for organization, keep track of so many elements, are painstakingly accurate in how much dialogue fits when it comes to distance traveled, and how exactly a character needs to maneuver to cross paths with someone else for the story. All of this drastically increases the level of detail and thus quality for The Pitt. And this is really just the starting layer of complexity because it gets even crazier from here. One of my favorite aspects of how the show is written is the way they stack multiple subplots and juggle them. I'd represent the season of plotlines with this graphic where you have 4 types of cases and their associated lengths. You have the one on top that stretches across the entire season and operates as one of the main plot lines. Under that, you have subplots that last multiple episodes, and then it shrinks from there with shorter cases that last about an episode or 2. And finally, trauma cases are on the bottom, which are normally resolved within a few scenes. Every episode on the bottom axis of this linear graph weaves between all of these plot lines in an orchestrated dance, managing development across all of these cases, and we receive payoff from them at specific times when each case ends. Like, notably after the episode 3 mark, you start receiving more resolution, while the beginning episodes deal more heavily in character development, introductions, and establishing the integral through lines of the season. And even despite having to do a lot of build-up in those opening episodes, they still balance payoff in the sense of minor and trauma cases getting resolved. From a writing perspective, this is like a min-maxing management fever dream, since you have so many plots and associated characters to juggle that also grow through the cases they have. Like, every case is specifically given to a character to develop them in a certain direction. The most notable example in season 1 is Whitaker forming a lovely rapport with a patient who was proud of him, and then he suddenly crashes, and shortly after, they're not able to bring him back. Whitaker here is gutted, blaming himself for his patient's death, even though he did everything right. This exemplifies that sometimes death is inevitable in the ER, and is something you have to get used to so you can move on and continue to function at your job. This starting point sends Whitaker down a resounding arc of gaining back his confidence and assurance in his ability as a doctor, punctuated by the gauntlet-like test of season 1's climax, which also acts as a test for essentially every character in some way, some physically and others mentally. So now you take Whitaker's journey and times that by 8, because that's how many remaining primary characters we have, each with their own cases, and some characters are paired up at different times to further develop new dynamics, unlocking unique synergies. Because we obviously can't forget about the additional complexity of character relationships. An analogy here writing-wise is like a clown juggling 8 different objects at once, but at light speed. The way to sort out this management nightmare is the writers first work out each character arc, as that's the most integral component for any story. Then from there, they jot down on a whiteboard general topics and types of cases they want to explore, what has the most narrative potential, and then they see which cases have the best synergy to carry along certain characters on their arcs. So it's a mix of cherry-picking certain cases and making sure the effect of said case leaves a character in the state they want. Like, given Whitaker's arc, you can't give him a bunch of triumphant moments early on, as that would mess with his ending. Triumphant moments, by the way, are used very surgically in the Pit, and are always directly tied to character development, making those moments much more special. Now, to look at this general point of stacking subplots from a wider perspective, some shows balance a lot of different plot lines, like a big one being Game of Thrones. However, the main difference for the Pit is all of these plot lines are in one location happening simultaneously, while also overlapping, clashing, and interweaving. So again, like how the title of the video implies, the level of execution on display is that of war planning, along with the climax stepping up the level of complexity and frequency of cases, sending the narrative into a hellish multi-episode overdrive, which in of itself is a masterpiece. Synergizing with the stacking subplots point, this leads the show to be written to have this infectious rhythm. And I mean rhythm in a sense of how pacing and tempo shifts between cases. This is achieved in multiple ways, and the first one is the Pit generally flows between a state of relative calm and increased panic and tension, almost like a wavelength. This is represented through the normal cases and the trauma cases.
Well, let's give it a go, shall we? Mm-hmm. Ready? That's something we've tried to weave into our show, not just because it's real, but because audiences need to have a little bit of relief from that tragedy. They need to kind of go positive, negative in order to appreciate and enjoy the ride.
Just when things start to mellow out a bit and we develop the plot to a satisfying degree, that's when the writers spike in a trauma case. It's a sudden dose of action that of course keeps the viewer entertained and forces the characters to always be on their toes. It increases their workload, and sometimes the writers spice things up by doubling this pressure with another trauma case in the adjacent room. However, spending too much time on these types of cases can quickly burn out the viewer, and variety is the key in the Pit to keep things fresh.
Variety's the spice of life. I thought that was garlic.
Also, even during trauma upticks, we're still cutting around to different areas. This goes into the second aspect of Infectious Rhythm, where the time spent on each case is intentionally short to increase narrative productivity and momentum. Never does it feel like you're spending too much time in any given area. To apply a bit of math here, looking at one episode, each scene lasts about 1 to 2 minutes, and this reinforces that inherent quick pace. The creators are utilizing constant intercutting between different subplots to tell different stories simultaneously, but to also keep scenes short to give the sensation of this environment moving quickly. If anything, this pace creates a sensation of wanting more from scenes. Sometimes the creators intentionally cut moments short because it makes the characters revisiting a subject feel more dramatically charged, which I think is an interesting writing choice because instead of a scene overstaying its welcome, you're now eagerly anticipating when characters reunite. It creates tension in character relationships because communication and coming to a place of understanding is how you relieve that tension. This especially applies to the end of season 2 surrounding Robbie's character arc where, without going into spoilers, he's almost at all costs trying to avoid his inner conflict that's leaking out and affecting others, making his confrontational dialogue scenes outstanding and emotionally climactic. Another example of the Pitt's infectious rhythm is how they're able to almost always end an episode on a mini cliffhanger. That aspect alone really aids the show's bingeability, from sharp character revelations, cases going haywire, or twists that you can't wait to see the fallout of. This creates a tangible narrative hook to keep you engaged. Because to be honest, making 15 hours of a single shift interesting is a natural challenge. The writers have to pinpoint certain integral events to happen at the end of every hour to keep you motivated and watching. And these are also events that don't feel forced in a sense that they're just doing this for the sake of ending on a cliffhanger. Like if every episode ended with a medical complication, then that would highlight a laziness in the writing. However, most of these cliffhangers are more character-oriented, dealing with trauma or great turmoil, and since these aspects are built up, they always feel earned. So in general, when it comes to pace and rhythm for the Pit, I think the creators manufactured this perfect formula that keeps the show riveting across its almost 15-hour runtime. Taking a break from analyzing the writing for this section, I want to focus on a production aspect that really highlights the show's philosophy of authenticity, and that's what I would call extreme continuity. Continuity on its own is making sure any element of a story is consistent across time and space, generally regarding anything like props, actor placements, costumes, lighting, etc. Continuity is crucial because breaking it severs the internal reality of your story, severing audience immersion. Now for the Pit, given how chaotic of a set it is, and the fact that we have a map to track everything, that means the entire set has to be accurate across 100% of its filming. Every single section of the set has to operate in real time. If a scene is being filmed in one area, that means anything covered in the background also has to be active, because this entire set is a living and breathing environment. The creators kind of refer to the Pit as a stage play in a way, where every aspect of the set has to be on and alive. This creates an interesting role for an actor where, depending on what's being shot, you're either a main, side, or background actor. This even applies to the main character played by Noah Wyle.
You may be in the deep background for 4 hours and then find yourself in the main part of the narrative for the next 3. You may only be in the deep background, but when the camera finds you, you have to be at the apex of your storyline.
If the character exists in this space and the camera is looking in that direction, then you have to be doing that background action. This sheer level of detail is what I mean by extreme continuity, and it goes even further. Like, most of the background nurses are actual nurses in real life. If they don't have much dialogue, then chances are they're a real nurse. This both helps the inherent realism and also sells the heightened form of continuity because these real nurses can easily carry out their roles to a T over and over again without extensive rehearsals, making them invaluable to production. A couple more interesting behind the scenes details that relate to continuity is the entire crew wearing nurse outfits. So if any crew member is captured on screen, they'd blend in with the actors and won't break continuity. And to make everything easier to track throughout production, they shoot the season chronologically, allowing them to not have to worry about what the hospital looked like exactly at random points in the season. Then from here, season 2 even takes this notion of extreme continuity and elevates it, where one of the main forms of conflict is a threat of a cyber attack. So the hospital has to shut down their computer systems to negate it, and thus, everyone has to keep track of patients and lab orders with physical documents and a whiteboard, which now further increases the level of needed accuracy for the amount of props being tracked on set. To handle this overwhelming task, the production interestingly hired an additional script supervisor because one person tracking all of this would have been impossible. They would have melted internally from the amount of anxiety that task would present. So this all goes back to the show's thesis of authenticity and truth. In order to be steeped in those aspects, you have to methodically make sure your accuracy is immaculate, and the level the Pitt achieves is genuinely astounding. So I just mentioned authenticity and truth being what this show prioritizes, and that also applies to the writing and what the creators classify their process as writing in truth. Pretty much everything, or at least almost everything in the Pitt, is based on some kind of real-world account.
Mostly when we're doing notes on things, when they come in, it's just, is this you, the writer? Or did you hear this? Where did you hear this? Is this a fact? Is this opinion? And if the writer can't justify it from somebody that they heard it from or can actually show us the factual representation of it, then it gets cut.
The reason why the writers prioritize being truthful is we live in an age of dire misinformation.
What are you doing? Are you crazy? Not in my hospital!
The writers feel as though they have an inherent obligation to be as accurate and truthful as possible when it comes to anything representing this medical world. This isn't just about entertainment, it's informational and can even be educational for some people. That, and the more authentic you are with the material, the more you gain the respect from the audience and even healthcare workers. The writers and show creators themselves are showing and proving that they're putting in that great effort of being as accurate as possible. And a part of that accuracy is simply listening to the accounts and testimonies from healthcare workers. This is, after all, a love letter to that industry, representing the many problems within it, along with societal and political problems that affect this space. Some of these testimonies and anecdotes from healthcare workers end up almost directly in the show. Like one of the main examples, and one that happened to be my favorite case due to how gutting it was the drowned child victim. When the creators heard this story, they were shocked.
And as soon as she told us that story, we all were like, oh my God, that may be the saddest thing we've ever heard. Then all of us were like, I want that story. I hope I get that one.
Unsurprisingly, that episode, which was written by Joe Sachs, was nominated for a Best Writing Emmy. And looking at that episode more closely, Joe Sachs builds the somber tone layer by layer to a point where it becomes crushing. It first starts with the grandma giving her heartbreaking testimony, which we see physically starts to break our characters. The parents then show up and they're obviously gutted, but the real genius maneuver here is the juxtaposition of the sister not realizing her sibling is dead. She's making her a get well card, and it's also revealed here that her sister saved her life and drowned as a result. Which, you think that's enough to make you cry, but Joe Sachs increases the pressure of this sadness chokehold by having Mel bring out a teddy bear that this unaware child will use to carry a message to her deceased sister. All of these layers add up to a point where it's almost impossible to survive this scene without shedding a tear. This also isn't the only example of real-world accounts in this episode alone, because the whole segment of learning about the first paramedics and the Freedom House ambulance service was very intriguing. So now, zooming out, every episode is laden with rich informational topics that are grounded in our reality, making the Pitt itself extremely immersive from how realistic it is. Another aspect that contributes to this philosophy is some writers being doctors and the usage of consultants. Like Joe Sachs, who we were just talking about, is also a doctor. This gives him supreme expertise to write for the Pitt and can achieve a level of accuracy that would otherwise be much more difficult for anyone else. If anyone has watched Better Call Saul as an example, then you directly note their usage of lawyer consultants as well. This added professionalism grounds this fictional world, not just from a writing perspective, but also being present on set and making sure the actors know exactly what to do physically. Everything needs to be accurate, and it's also okay if you don't understand all the fancy lingo when it comes to dialogue.
Because the audience doesn't need to know what all the medical dialogue means, they just need to understand what's happening. And what I say to people is you can turn the sound off on the Pitt and understand what's happening in the scene.
The bare minimum should be you having a hard time following the dialogue at times, because that's fundamentally a realistic response if you don't have that educational background. This highlights what so many people love about the Pitt: competence porn. While it is a silly term, it communicates that people want to be immersed in a setting that functions at its highest level. Professionals working at their prime. It's impressive and satisfying to watch, and if you're also able to write in captivating characters, arcs, and informational topics, then that's a winning formula and is why The Pitt is an outstanding show. So as a whole, between these 5 topics, this is why I find The Pitt so fascinating and why the writing is so complex. I haven't even really touched on the more usual things like plot, characters, arcs, dialogue, and the climax, but all of those aspects are of course excellent. I could definitely gush about those things, but I think the topics we explored in this video highlights why The Pitt is really special. Thank you for watching, and my Letterboxd, Discord, and Patreon links are in the description, and have a nice day. Thank you to my consistently supporting top patron, Logan Farmer.